And, we were working with lots of influencers who had a big community. And that's how you grow a transactional business. If it's enterprise, it varies, the kind of customer types you're targeting. But we were, growth marketing, growth hackers. We've had lots of, because we work with so many different agencies across the board. They have, managed service providers effectively, right? And they were obviously marking up their prices and using our software as a backbone to their services.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Clicks to Customers podcast. I'm your host, John Horn, CEO of StubGroup, and today we're joined by a very special guest, Besnik. I'm going to try to get your last name correctly here, hopefully as best as I can, Vrallaku. So Besnik Vrellaku is the founder, awesome, I did it, the founder of Salesflow.io, which we'll talk about a lot today, as well as has worked in many other businesses, is kind of a serial entrepreneur, so I'm sure we'll have a wide-ranging conversation here. But excited to talk about sales and marketing and business building and get a lot of really actionable insights that you who are watching or listening to this episode can take for your own business. So Besnik, thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Hey, it's my pleasure, John. I'm excited to dive in a lot of things and I hope to be of value to all the listeners listening to this.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. So first of all, Salesflow.io. What is that? What do you guys do over there?
In short, we are effectively a multi-channel LinkedIn email automation prospecting platform, right out there. That many out there that, if you're working in sales and business development, we are a central piece to doing prospecting proactively, effectively. So it's lead generation, in short. Obviously, we have our twist in what we've done over the last 7+ years being in the market. So we just help businesses grow using outbound solutions that are mixed and molded with marketing technologies, basically.
Awesome. So outbound lead generation, mixing in sales and marketing, that is important for most businesses who need to get leads into the pipeline. So I think there's a lot of different aspects, probably what we'll talk about, that'll be relevant to those listening. So let's jump in to the beginning. How did you start? Like what got you interested in starting Salesflow.io, and what did that first iteration of the company look like?
Absolutely. I'm 33 right now, so we have to sort of go back probably, 8 years almost, and even more, perhaps over 10 years. And over the course of those sort of early days of company creation, I created over 8+ MVP solutions in the B2B space. I had this righteous iteration process, sprint development of different business ideas before I sort of stepped into the real core one. And I was working in one big business, bigger sort of product, I would say, Vision at that time, and fast track to say 8 years ago right now, for instance, where we had this B2B software solution, and I was like, okay, this is a great product. How we're going to launch this particular product after those MVPs? We decided on one, and one thing that Vision had with all other solutions that I created is that we all needed cost-effective solutions and lead generation strategies that are cost-effective in terms of CAC, in terms of ROI of solutions, and just being incredibly effective. And obviously, LinkedIn and email outreach weren't as saturated as perhaps they might be right now and how things are going, but ultimately it yielded incredible results. And this was doing it manually. Okay, we were prospecting and doing all of these solutions completely manually, and then we just saw incredible results. So, and then, of course, based on all those data points, we said, well, we need to automate this. We need to find ways. So a product was born out of that challenge, because it was a personal one myself, but also for those 8 MVPs, never mind for everyone else that could have, used this tactic. Because effectively, software is using a tactic, a solution. You convert it so it's scalable, so others can do it the same cost effectively, right? Ultimately. So that's kind of how, in short, the whole thing came about. Because the reality is, if you're bootstrapping, self-funded business, even as funded naturally businesses, you may not always you don't have tens of thousands of dollars to spend on advertisement. It can get really expensive. and you don't know who they are, even if you might convert them. What if it's the LTV of the customer might not yield to your liking, for instance, or other channels that are just unknown and unpredictable. So what's really left? Like, you have to take control of the predictable revenue models that used to exist back, at early days, and still are, but just changing. I'm sure we'll touch on that shortly. So that's really where it came from. So when you're paying $99 to reach out to 500 to 1,000 plus prospects and opportunities, you can do the math here. Like, if you're selling products at minimum ACV of like 10K a year, like, the math will ultimately add up, unless you just don't know what solution you are, and if you're selecting your prospects proactively. So, that's really where the value prop of the whole thing came about, is solving a genuine problem of companies in order to grow effectively and predictably, ultimately. But, as time went on, the way we sort of marbled and grew, because we're a transactional business. We're AAV, what, maybe a few grand a year, because we're selling to SMBs and a cost-effective solution. And then, we had to say, how do we grow as a business ourselves? I'm sure our audience is marketing and transactional sales. It's a very different marketing to mid-market, higher AOV solutions. A lot more human touches are needed in the sales journey. So we the first sort of traction that we ended up getting beyond doing outbound and getting our first 100 customers, how do we scale that based on the transactional model? And we just grew through communities was the bedrock of our growth, and still continues to this day, a lot of our things. So we focused on how can we grow through community, and a combined conjunction of both marketing and sales alignment. So those two were the core ones that, as a bootstrap business, we're running out of cards. Like, how do we scale very quickly to be self-funded? So community groups was one of our big starting growth journeys 7 years ago from now.
Let's double click on a number of things there. So community groups, can you elaborate more on that? What does that look like? Where are these groups? How do you get into them? Yeah, I'd love to learn more about that.
Absolutely. I think back in 7 years ago, Facebook groups was massive. Okay. And, we were working with lots of influencers who had a big community, and that's how you grow a transactional business. If it's enterprise, it varies, the kind of customer types you're targeting, but we were, growth marketing, growth hackers, all the SMBs of the world are looking for new strategies, new growth tactics to grow, basically. And we were just one of the tool stacks in sort of the belt of hacks that people can use to grow, while keeping that metrics, that CAC incredibly low. And that just became appetizing at the time, because nobody was using these kind of tactics at scale or the way we were doing it. And that just became a value add for the admins and the influencers running those groups, that we worked on the value-centric content. So this, that's ultimately how it comes about. We weren't just there selling the product. We were selling a tactic. We were selling the ultimate, the psychology behind why it's a software in the first place, as a business, as a value prop.
And to incentivize those influencers, were you doing things like affiliate programs or rev shares, or how did you get them on your side?
We just got them excited. If they're passionate about it, the product is good enough and it's net new and they haven't seen it before. And people sometimes can't always have that benefit, if I'm honest, especially nowadays. But back then, zero cost and zero nothing. We just gave them ability to look good by using our software, by putting it as part of a tactic. And so they become even more of an influencer. So imagine that. That's probably the top tier way to grow, is how can you make your influencers look better? And as thought leaders, as those guys that know their basically. So I think that's how it stemmed from. And of course, I think we both know that doesn't really work anymore. There has to be sponsorship, pricing models, and revenue shares, and affiliate models, and all that kind of jazz. So it depends on supply and demand, really. But back then, nothing, neither of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So let's go back to, you mentioned MVP a number of times. I'd love for those who are listening who maybe don't understand what that acronym means, can you explain that, and then also explain kind of how what tactics, what steps you take to get to that point?
So, well, when I created those 8 MVPs in the early days of business company creation or value proposition, is MVP is minimal viable product. A lot of the term was coined by Eric Ries back in the days, maybe 10, 15 years ago in the lean startup, right? Iterations. And really that's what it is, and ultimately the whole goal of product creation or even feature development right now in product and beyond is how do you create solutions very quickly to get to the value proposition, or a feature, a value prop that's just going to matter to users, and they will just fall in love with it. So that's really that's done in so many different ways, but you have to prioritize certain channels and test and create a lot of hypothesis around those MVPs at scale. So these are the kind of minimal viable product approach, or even minimal viable strategy, perhaps. Sometimes we've used a lot of that modeling, even in kind of this in Salesflow, in our marketing, about how we do experimentation, because that's what minimal viable really is you want to cut your losses very quickly at minimal, at the most lowest investment point that you can do in order to move on to where you're trying to get to, because maybe that feature or that strategy just didn't work and you want to move on quickly, basically. So I think that's kind of very broadly and vaguely defined, but at least that's the way I see it.
Do you find many of your customers now use Salesflow to help themselves identify their MVP? Or they usually, are your customers usually a little more established, they've got an MVP and now they're going to get more leads into their pipeline?
I think there's so many use cases. Like, we're just a messaging platform. How you use it is completely up to you, really. But we had students reaching out to get jobs, never mind corporate companies looking to do business development and partnerships, or people who are reaching out in their automation to just get more webinars, or they're looking to get more partnerships, or they're looking for, we work with a ton of agencies, for instance, that even uses as the bedrock of our system for their end clients to offer them lead generation. So we're incredibly agnostic in terms of the usability side. But most, have one common theme, is that they have an existing business. They have an agenda that you want to achieve, or people are seeking investment. We just amplify, we're a catalyst to opportunity, is the way I would define Salesflow effectively. We just allow you to scale it up so you can get more responses, more information, more yeses, more nos, perhaps that's still an indication of progress, to get to where you want to go to. So we are just a messaging workflow ability for you to complete whatever agenda you're ultimately looking to achieve through a proactive method, basically.
That's awesome. So you provide the toolbox, the expertise, the skill set, and then people say, here's what I need to accomplish, and then you go out and make it happen.
Yeah, our system. Because we're a software that most users go in there and just plug and play ultimately on their end, and that's the journey. That I think the ICP and who you're targeting, really, it's up to the end users to because they know their customers, but they know what they're trying to achieve ultimately. So more or less.
Awesome. So going back to 8 or so years ago, when you're just starting out, you haven't reached that point yet where you needed to scale. You kind of mentioned in passing there that the first 100 customers that you acquired.
Yeah.
What were the tactics you were using at that point? Maybe it was community groups already. Maybe something else. How did you get those first customers into the door?
Well, we just ate our own dog food, so to speak. Yeah. We were able to create, have a lot of different people on an initial company. We just outreach at scale. Imagine back in the days you were doing invites of thousands. So we had 5, 10 different freelancers or consultants to just amplify our outreach. So we were doing 10,000 outreach a month. Can you imagine that? 10,000 right now. Nowadays you have email, but imagine even in LinkedIn and other platforms combined. So we were just doing it the hard way, and even ACV was at $99 a month. We were still seeing great value because we're doing it at such a large scale. Now I think so that's really how we got it. We just used our own tool because we'd had zero costs apart from the people that were doing the response handling and perhaps obviously myself and a few initial folks that I had back in the day. So we just did it. That's how we just grinded to that point where we could be self-funded to then be able to afford to work with influencers and others out there. That got us from 10 to 1,000 ultimately. But the first 100 was really just really grimy automation hacks. So, we just did we used our own tool to grow ourselves, same way that I did it for manually and then automatically with Vision that I mentioned earlier, which is another company that I'm part of. So those were the main tactics that we used at the very beginning.
I love that you use that phrase, eat our own dog food, because I use that phrase as well when people talk to us. Like, hey, how do you guys get clients? Like, well, we eat our own dog food. We run advertising campaigns, do the type of work we do for our clients. So I love it. It's one of those things where, there's different examples of this, but, you find an agency, they say, yeah, we specialize in X, Y, and Z. And then you just go and look and like, well, are you doing X, Y, and Z for yourself? You're not. Interesting. That's concerning, because if you can't do it for yourself, why should I pay you to do it?
Yep.
So a lot of different, I've got so many different questions coming to mind here. Let's stay maybe in the early days for a little bit longer and talk about challenges. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you experienced in those early days when, again, proving market fit and then starting to scale the business?
Well, a lot, we weren't creating a whole new industry per se. Whilst yes, a lot of tools are using, LinkedIn and email outreach, we were just expanding the TAM of awareness of the industry, for instance, through marketing effectively and people shouting about it. But I'd say one of them would be around increase in TAM and demand to some extent for it in a very much more secure way, using our own value props. But I think, after the 100 customers and influencers beyond, the real core challenges, apart from product development that you obviously put a lot of time and investment, is how do you scale and grow from that? Because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we can just grow 100, 1,000, but how are you going to manage the multi-requests, are you going to hire more people? So I think the growth pains are real in a lot of companies here. You can continue to amp up, just by yourself, perhaps, John, if you're working with clients, for instance, and they'll say, well, look, hey guys, how much ad, I've got an extra 100 grand that I can spend on ad, let's scale it up to 100 grand. But then I think what people are missing is like, okay, well, can you handle that much demand, even if the ad metrics work out perfectly,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'd say really that the core challenges of businesses out there is that and similar to us, and this is literally from experience because I felt the pains, and we just grew too quickly. It's a thing at the beginning, just lots. We had to find ways to hire more people. We needed more product to solve more bugs, more churn. How do we handle this and how do we handle that? What about expansion? What about this? So and that's, you just lost revenue because you couldn't meet expectations of what people would expect in a product or solution in the market. Because we grew up predominantly US customers, by the way. Our whole market's in the US. So so I'd say really the core challenges is, for me, and lessons, and obviously we learned trials and trial and errors over the course of time. Really, it's how do you anticipate growth pains? How do you de-risk that so you can maximize revenue opportunities by being realistic, but also anticipating those challenges? And that just comes from experience. So either you're just going to have to go with it and the expense of your revenue, basically future revenue, or you can start to pace yourself in growth accordingly to go beyond. But it just, personally, in hindsight, would I change anything? Probably not. Obviously, if I wish I had the same brain I do now, because it's a lot different in terms of experience. But ultimately, it's just about how do you handle growth? Because most people think it's just more revenue, but it's not. It's not. How do you continue momentum? Because it can, if you're not continue innovating, it can burn out and you have to restart it, and that's really hard. So how do you so that would be really for me to share to the audience here is how can you handle growth, because it's a serious challenge, as opposed to, oh, yes, I can't wait to grow my business, because most people then aren't able to handle that. And when they haven't seized that revenue, then their future growth is already impacted. So I think people can certainly neglect the growth pains of business.
100%, because revenue it's not the only thing that is growing. The problems are also growing.
Yeah,
The size of the problems are growing. And
100%.
yeah, a lot of people just look at that top line number and then you get into this cycle of, okay, well, now we're so strapped from an execution standpoint that the quality of our service maybe is diminishing and dropping, and then that's starting to have a reputational impact. You can get into a really, really bad cycle. I'm curious, have you ever considered or played around with concepts like wait lists or things like that to basically say, hey, we don't want to take business on right now, but we do want your business. You can come on next month or 3 months or whatever. Is that been something you played around with or not so much?
I have, but at that MVP stage, I think that's more of a pre-launch strategy typically. Have we halted access to companies? To be honest with you, it's a good problem to have. It just depends what kind of business you're in. I'm sure not everybody listening here are in software and SaaS, right? But if you're in services, it's a whole different thing, because can you deliver on particular services, so it just varies what business you're under. It's difficult to quantify. I would add, from your question, just to follow up, what would it be to solve a pain point of the challenge, you mean, John? Or I'm trying to understand, maybe a use case to your typical audience could help me answer a little bit better.
Yeah, it's not a tactic I've seen used often, but when I've seen it used after kind of that pre-release period, like you mentioned, is situations where companies are basically saying, hey, we only have so much capacity and we don't want to decrease the quality of the service that we're providing to you. This is probably more in the managed services area where, people is what you're selling and you only have so many people ultimately and hours in the day. And so they'll say something like, hey, we can't take you this month, but in 2 months we'll have scaled up to the place where we've got team members trained to take you, or that type of thing.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of where it came to mind from.
Understood. No, it's a valid point, because, like you said, scalability is very different from managed solutions. I mean, look, I'll give you a perfect example. We've had lots of, because we work with so many different agencies across the board. They have, managed service providers effectively, right? And they were obviously marking up their prices and using our software as a backbone to their services. So there were a few fold in terms of them being able to scale that process. And it's really down to how can you productize your solution, maybe not into a software, but into a packaged solution that is, it's not like an enterprise client where you're just offering a really dynamic, custom, bespoke, they're paying 200 grand a year, fine. But really, I think it's other customers, how can you package it that is in a way that you can scale up so that you wouldn't even need that wait list? Maybe there's something that's streamlined in your delivery, so it's much more scalable. You can actually accept it a lot more. So I would really say that probably the only thing that comes to mind around that solutions for a lot of managed service providers is how else are you using technology as your backbone to scale operations, to be able to then increase your intake of new clients. That's one of the key things. And sometimes they would have a higher tier and a lower tier, because you can accept a higher tier because they're willing to pay more. But if they're not, you can offer something a little bit more standardized, so that would be probably just something, of course, I think the easy option is just put a waiting list, but who knows when those clients maybe gone to a competitor or someone else. So I think here's just diversifying, standardizing offerings could help scalabilities. Perhaps maybe this is the larger question at hand, right? Is how do you scale a business without compromising on those revenues, basically, and those opportunities. So that would be it. It's standardizing more, or another word that I recommend a lot of the audience look at is productized services.
That makes a lot of sense. Basically finding those bottlenecks that are impacting you, and then saying, okay, how can we create maybe a somewhat different service, productized service that takes those bottlenecks out and that can scale without those problems that we're encountering. Mm-hmm. Awesome. I'd love to ask you a little bit about differentiation, because I'm sure, as the category you're in has matured, I'm sure plenty of people have copied you, have come into it, and there's lots of people who say, yeah, we do this, we do that. And this is something a lot of our clients, deal with, think about. Often we'll have a business come to us and they'll be in a crowded marketplace. and they're saying, hey, let's say, for example, they want to run advertising campaigns. Like, hey, we want to run advertising campaigns. And so we'll have conversations with them about, well, what is unique about you? What can we tap into so that we're not just going after everybody that all of your competitors are going after? How can we make you look different? So how have you thought about that for your company and differentiation and messaging and product and so forth over the years?
Excellent question, because I think we're in a stage where, it's like almost difficult to just stand out. There's so much noise, there's so much noise coming out from everywhere. And there's the AI now is even here, is just adding to the mix of just basically, it's part of my language, but it's true, and I've dabbled with this question for quite a time with my leadership team and others. And I think, a lot of companies are just always not new here. Maybe they're establishing, existing. They might have a reputation. And, that's the first thing, is just your brand equity of your company, of who you are. That will never change, really, And I think that's something that your competitors might not have, is this gravitas that you have in your space. And now that's what, how do you increase the gravitas even more? Personal branding. Why am I in this podcast? Why are you doing podcasts, John? Mm-hmm. Let's begin there, it's how can you use that gravitas, that knowledge, that know-how, that reputation that you have, and shout more about it. You are your business. So why should it always have to entail a logo? So I think first things first is you as an individual, your experience, exposure. It can be any AI model, because sense of judgment that you have to help your customers will outweigh any competition that may only have 2 years. So I would say that would be the first thing that any business needs to amplify, if they're not already. To be honest with you, I've never, it took me 6 years to just do this, right? Ultimately, finally. But because I was more of a low-key guy, you know what I mean? Like I was in the back end, I was happy just doing, running a business. But now over the last year, I'm getting tons of inquiries and leads and opportunities and partnerships, just because I'm there showing, selling myself, pushing out there. And as you can see here, you can tell that I know my to some extent without sounding arrogant. Yep. But it comes from experience of 13 years. So I think that's the first thing. And I think, moving on after that, if you're offering services, it's about business model and innovation here. Okay. But what I mean by business model innovation is things are changing, economies of scales are happening, people are getting exposure to AI, competition is increasing. Like, how can you continue to innovate in your business model? Mm-hmm. So I think just taking a step back, is my pricing strategy, or is it the same as it was 5 years ago? How can I continue to differentiate in terms of offering? Has the value prop adjusted? Because if you have 3,001 tools, it's here, you need to start adjusting to the value prop that customers expect. So I think business model innovation here, you can really become competitive. And the reason why I just didn't say just service offering, because 3,001 people will offer the same. So the moat, I think you say it, isn't just about features in your service list. It's about how are you innovating in those categories to be a differentiator. And thirdly, I think it's about really your math in your business model, the back end. You can have a lot of business that are shouting more, but as a business, what channel, what margins do you have with all these different channels that you're using, for instance? So I think it's about also just, does the CAC payback periods and everything in between add up well with these channels, and not being too distracted, because I think many people can just be ultimately always distracted with focusing on competition, but actually just understanding all those customers, ensuring that your retention of your customers are enough, will ultimately matter a lot more than continuing to build things or offer services that your clients might not want. And the final one is really, if I may, there's so many, because it really depends on the businesses, but it's just about specialization. Like if you look at AI models and things that kind of come out in the future, it's too generic still. That's why the future now will decouple a lot of the things that AI is doing. So they can have specialized AI for medicine, obviously, pharmaceuticals, for B2B manufacturing lead generation or some other whatever it could be. So I think it's about that specialization. People will start to go on because you're training that model, or you're training your business to be specialized, and that way you have added bonus in niching down that specialization that your competitors might not be able to do. It's like you think, there's lots of agencies out there, but do you know why you choose one agency to another typically? It's because they've worked with that industry for so long. They have all these learning curves, data points, that they're able to offer better results because of that. So I think specialization is, if people are not doing too generic, they're going to end up just losing that competition if they weren't specialized in their industries as well. So that would be perhaps my final one here.
I think that's a really good point. I've seen this in our own agency, even here at StubGroup, where we do a lot of different things, provide a lot of different services that many other agencies do as well. But an area we've specialized in is specifically with like Google and Google's policies and compliances, and helping people who have suspensions fix those things, helping people not get suspended. And that's something that most of our competitors don't do. And we've built up experience and a bit of a moat over the last 10 years that we've been doing it. And so that's something that when we're talking with people, we can say, hey, this is something you're not going to get elsewhere. Yes, we also run your Google Ads campaigns. We can do your SEO or email marketing or whatever. But, here's something that is a unique service that you're not going to find elsewhere.
100%.
So that resonates with me and our experience here for sure. I would love, so you've mentioned AI a lot, and that's the elephant in most rooms these days.
Yeah.
It's hard to go a podcast without talking about it. But I'd love to hear, are there any ways that you're integrating AI right now into your product or into the back end of, building products, executing, etc.?
Well, there's a lot of juicy stuff that we've worked on in the past and perhaps in the future, but absolutely. Like, there's so much that ultimately you can do, and I think it's down to personalization, how we're using AI for personalization, how you're using it for copy, ultimately sales copy. Everybody has different challenges, so I think sales copy. So I think there's a lot there that we've been pushing a lot more on both those things in sales, as to help sales teams or businesses to try and use within our system to try and improve those conversion rates. So those would be the two core things that we've done, is how to use the sales methodologies without learning them to get that output, that copy that could help them aid in that conversions. Because as a system like us, for instance, we're a delivery system ultimately, right? We want to aid them. We can't find your customers for you. You know your business because you, like yourself, John, spent 10 years understanding your customers. So I think we try and aid in that process. So if you look, you have lots of methodologies in sales like MEDIC and ADA frameworks, PASS frameworks. There's just psychology of copy. So really focusing on the right type of copy is really important. So we've done things like that already. We've done things on, identifying positive, negative sentiments and understanding to help users understand positive conversations they can focus on within Salesflow. Others are working on personalization, how to scale icebreakers and so forth to personalize copies beyond just the generics of sales, but actually something about their business, about who they are, their industry, to try and resonate and improve those conversion rates. So that's been really the core forte at the moment. We have a lot of things in the roadmap, but that's so far what I can share.
Something you said there sparked a question in my mind, and maybe this goes nowhere, maybe it goes somewhere, but so you mentioned, copy. Obviously, copy is kind of the core to LinkedIn outreach, email outreach, etc. I'm also interested on the video side of things. Do you do much or anything of trying to incorporate video into that outreach? Is that a good idea, a bad idea? What are your thoughts about, someone getting on camera, or maybe even, AI versions of people getting on camera, which is getting more and more.
Yes, there's so many, 100%. There's loads of tools out there, and I think it's about combining everything. I mean, there's so many tactics. We could be here hours talking about it, but yeah, absolutely, that's part of personalization. One thing that we've done is use many tools out there, as the user gems, and I know a few others out there that can create videos at scale for you to be able to then copy that link and use it from a spreadsheet. So you can upload a file, already pre-made links that you've been generated by AI, for example, and you send out. And that link you click on, you obviously do it. So I think for us, it's just about enabling the ability for you to be able to add those links so they're personalized. So we've seen a tactic 110%. It's part of it. So even custom landing pages that you will have with that video inside it, so you can resonate, hi John or hi Tom or someone else. So they go in it, they know it's you, the video's there. It just improves that personable approach. So absolutely, it's a tactic that we've seen conversion increase by 20% onwards, really, just because you're adding that touch point. So that a very, very good point. But yes, that's definitely a tactic we've seen in the last 6 months, actually.
That's awesome. Well, I've learned a lot from this conversation, a lot of both good strategic insights as well as I think tactical recommendations that people can take away. As we kind of wrap things up here, is there anything final you'd like to share with people that you think would be useful? And then also, where is the best place for people to contact you and to learn more about Salesflow?
I think one note I take is, I think just, and I always say this is probably a theme now, but experiment well. Experiment. Don't just because one guy has one tool or two tools, they experiment and with different channels and tactics and put them into a wonderful spreadsheet of numbers, period, for businesses. And no, not that, if you're not good with numbers analytics, put it on ChatGPT and get the formulas ready, understand what's going on. But you need to be tracking everything. So even in Salesflow, we've just made huge advancements with our analytics, massive. Like you can see heat maps and points of when connected, not connected. I watch intervals, and because you can use this data to make decisions and make conversion rates, optimization, basically to improve that rate. So then you can go back and tweak this copy, tweak this campaign step, tweak this prospect because maybe they're just not a fit, to actually make your business grow, because then you just end up blaming your product or solution when in fact it's just something completely different. So that would be my final take here for the audience here, John. In terms of finding myself on LinkedIn, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm the only Besnik Vrellaku in the world. So just search me up if you can spell it. But otherwise, you can, salesflow.io. We have a ton of resources. You can go on the site. We have, many free trials and beyond for you to get free leads, basically. What harm are you ultimately going to have for just, getting 400 free leads effectively on the platform and seeing it for yourself, we're performance-based, for instance. So if you're not generating opportunities and leads, you're not tied down to some kind of massive contract unless you're getting results you want to save, right, ultimately. So salesflow.io, ton of resources, check it out. Otherwise, just connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm, as an example of those that are interested in personal branding, perhaps, I'm sharing a ton of things in the future.
Awesome. Well, we'll get links to all that in the show notes description here. And I'm really glad in that final note, Besnik, that you combined that experimentation with tracking, because so often we'll see clients, they hear, yep, you got to try, experiment, test. And so they'll do that. But they don't have, like you said, those formulas, those numbers in place to actually see what happened from the experiment, what can we learn, and how can that actually improve performance moving forward. So really important point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Besnik, thanks so much for your time. And everyone watching and listening to this, thank you for your time as well. Again, we'll have links to Besnik and his companies in the show notes and description. And until next time, go forth, do well, make money online, and we'll see you in our next episode. Take care.